The future calls. Ancient echoes in the halls. Circuits buzz, but hearts stay still. The stoic mind bends to its will. Control the chaos, seize the flame. Resilient minds play no game. Strength and wisdom to console. The Tech Stoic makes us whole.
All right. Welcome to the first episode of the Tech Stoic, where technology meets ancient wisdom. I'm your host, Brian Weiss. I am a Stoic philosopher, a student, ongoing student, always learning, and I run a IT service provider company called iTech Solutions. A quick background, we're at our 20th year. There's lots to navigate when it comes to technology, and more recently, I discovered Stoicism as a philosophy that's helped me personally in my personal life. And then I realized it also applies very well to technology and IT. And today we've got a guest I'm excited to have on who's been practicing Stoicism a lot longer than I have and is a public philosopher of Stoicism, Tanner Campbell. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I would love to do that. First of all, thanks for having me on your, what do we call this? Your virgin episode, your kickoff call?
The kickoff.
The
Yeah.
kickoff. I'm honored. I appreciate it. And I won't say that much about myself. I mean, as you said, I'm a public philosopher of Stoicism. I've co-authored a book on the topic with another philosopher of Stoicism whose name is Kai Whiting. The name of that book is What is Stoicism? A Brief and Accessible Overview. I also have a podcast that gets a few million downloads a year. It's called Practical Stoicism, where we talk a lot about the ethical theory and other things, a little bit deeper than you would find on social media or in most other places, with a practical slant, a contemporary slant, without ignoring the, let's say, more traditional aspects of Stoicism that people tend to forget about. And I do that because I think that Stoicism is, while not a cure-all for everything, I mean, I think that, but I don't know that everybody else would think that. I view it to be something that is of immense use to anybody, whether they want to adopt it as a whole life philosophy, which it absolutely has the capacity to be, as much as any religion would have that capacity, or if they just need it to get through a particularly trying time and they just want to borrow from it a little bit. One of the things that I try to spend a lot of my time doing is ensuring that people know that while you can borrow bits from it, it's meant to be a whole holistic life philosophy. That's really what it's built for. It provides an answer to everything in the same way that a religion provides an answer to everything. You have to buy into believing that those answers are correct. But Stoicism does that in a wholly naturalistic way. So there's no supernatural elements in Stoicism, which separates it from, of course, your more traditional religions. And of course, it's not a religion at all. But I will talk a lot on this episode, as you can probably already tell. So I will end it there and kick it back to you, Brian.
Yeah, you're our guest. Hopefully you're talking a lot more than I am. I love the intro. I think I've always known Stoicism or Stoic philosophy from a very kind of external outside definition. And I wonder if we shouldn't jump into like Stoicism basics or just like an intro, because I know there's some misconceptions about it out there as well. And maybe you can even point out some of those. So do you mind giving us kind of a high level?
Sure. I can do my whole book in 60 minutes. Let's see if we can turn that, we can make that happen. So Stoicism is at its core all about the building of a perfect moral character. So the ancient Stoics believed that there was a particular kind of knowledge, and this particular kind of knowledge was the whole goal of a human's life, was to attain this knowledge. And if you attained this knowledge, you were a sage. You were said to be being human in the most perfect way to be human. And that particular knowledge is what a lot of people know as virtue. Virtue is a kind of knowledge about morality, so it's a moral knowledge. But prior to Latin words, because rather Stoicism is a Greek philosophy and not a Roman philosophy, so they didn't speak Latin, they spoke Greek. The word was originally arete, and arete meant excellence, in particular moral excellence. So Stoicism is about the development of a perfectly moral character. That's what you're trying to do. Now, as a side effect of pursuing that in the way that the Stoics say you ought to pursue acquiring that knowledge, a lot of byproducts appear. So you'll often hear people say Stoicism's about taking good care of your body, or Stoicism's about being a strong man or woman, for that matter. It's not a gender-specific philosophy, not in the least, and we can talk about that a little bit. Or, you should be able to endure cold showers or ice baths or things like this. These things are Stoic. Those things are not in and of themselves Stoic, but being able to endure difficult things, being able to properly manage your emotional responses to things that naturally elicit an emotional response. The ability to do these things are things that a person who's on the quest to acquire perfect moral knowledge will, as a side effect, have as aspects of their character because of the way that you come to understand what it means to be moral in the Stoic sense.
Yeah, I look at it kind of mindfulness too, right? Not getting attached to the emotions that you might be feeling in a given situation, maybe appreciating them and understanding how to not let them control your actions. I've heard like the Stoic definition in the dictionary is kind of like lacking empathy almost. Can you touch on empathy and,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So there's this word in Stoicism, in Stoic ethical theory, called indifference. And when people hear that word, they hear it as if it's spelled ending in the letters ENCE, as in practicing indifference towards something. But that's not the case. It's ending in ENTS, so it's the pluralization of the word indifferent. So an indifferent thing in Stoicism is something that, even though it's happening out there in the world, it has no ability to change your moral character or cause you to become morally corrupt, to cause you to become vicious in your behavior. So terrible things happen out there in the world. And when a Stoic says that is an indifferent thing, they don't mean that it shouldn't be cared about or that it doesn't matter. Instead, what they mean is, I recognize that this ugly, horrible thing is happening out there in the world, but it is an indifferent in concerns to my moral character. Now, that doesn't mean that a Stoic can be indifferent about indifferent things. In fact, Stoics can't be indifferent toward anything, not toward any emotion, not toward anything that's going on out there in the world, because one of the things that a perfectly moral character does is when it receives information about the outside world, it has to judge what is appropriate to do in response to it. So if there's a war in some far off country, you can't say, well, I'm indifferent about that, or that's an indifferent thing, so it doesn't matter. Instead, you have to take it on board and turn it over in your mind from a moral perspective and say, what is, given my roles in the world, my skill sets, what I'm able to do, what is the appropriate moral response to this? Now, it might be do nothing. It might be donate money. It might be write a blog article. It could be anything, or it could be nothing. But a Stoic can't simply assume that it's nothing just because, for example, they can't end a war or they can't save the lives of people who are involved in it. So indifference and indifference, sounding the same, has been the source of a lot of confusion about what Stoics practice and what they actually care about or are supposed to care about.
yeah, you brought up some good examples there. And I know in the past, I've become attached to emotions that, ultimately caused me to suffer in ways I didn't have to because I was worried about things that were kind of outside of my control and feeling like almost like had some responsibility for it, and so can we touch on that a little bit, like understanding what's in your control, what you're responsible for and how that might relate as well?
Such a heavy question. Okay, so Epictetus is a name that anybody who's even briefly familiar with Stoicism will have heard. He's probably the third most popular name behind Seneca and then behind Marcus Aurelius. Usually that's the triad of individuals that, what is it? The trifecta? There we go. The trifecta of people known within Stoicism. All of those individuals, although Epictetus came from Turkey and then eventually went to what was then, well, and is still Greece, ancient Greece, to set up a school and teach. He's mostly thought of as a Roman Stoic philosopher, as is the case with Seneca, much later than him. And then Marcus Aurelius isn't considered so much a Stoic philosopher as he is a very much what's called a prakopton, which is someone who is progressing along the path toward moral virtue, towards moral excellence, and they're a practitioner, really. Marcus Aurelius isn't a great teacher so much as he's a really good example of how a person can imperfectly practice Stoicism, but it's not necessarily the point that you practice it perfectly. It's the point that you're practicing it and efforting and trying. So anyway, back to Epictetus. He talks about the dichotomy of control. Now, Epictetus actually never used these words. He doesn't talk about that. He doesn't say dichotomy of control, and he didn't really say control. He said, if I can remember here, F amine, which means something that is up to us, or not F amine, being not up to us. And if something is up to us, it means we have complete control over it. So if, let's say, you might say, I have control over throwing a ball for someone to catch. Epictetus would say, well, do you have complete control over it? And you would say, of course I do. I have complete control over it. And then Epictetus would say, well, what if you have a stroke in the middle of trying to throw that ball? Or what if you have a muscle twitch? Or what if a bird flies out of the sky and grabs the ball from you? So do you really have control over throwing that ball? And you would have to then say, well, no, I don't. Okay, so what do you have control over? What is up to you is really what he's asking. And the answer to that is, I have the ability to control my thoughts, some of my thoughts, not all of them. If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, you're going to think of it. There's nothing you can do about it. You have the ability to control some of your thoughts, some of your emotions, and your opinions about things. These are things that exist within your rational faculty, your hegemonic faculty, your brain. So if it's within you, and I don't mean your body, I mean your rational faculty, your mind, the thing that is really you, you have control over it. And in some cases, only partial control over it. Everything else, you have maybe some influence over. You can certainly act in the world, and many times the things we intend to do are the things that happen. But that's not because necessarily we have control over them. It's because we get fortunate in the carrying out of our wishes. Usually when you want to throw a ball, you throw the ball. But that doesn't mean it's because you have control over it. It's because you have influence over it. And that's a really important distinction in Stoicism, because Stoicism wants you to focus on the things that you have total control over, which are only your thoughts, attitudes, and actions, like I said before, and some of your emotions. And this is important because it's how one of the things Epictetus talks about is, if you go through your life thinking things should be differently, or lamenting the fact that you don't have control, or that you don't have control over these things you think you should. Like, I wish my partner was more sensitive to me, or I wish my boss was nicer to me. You begin to get upset about the world for a thing that's irrational to get upset about the world about. Why are you upset that your boss is cruel to you? You can't, or at least, why are you upset that that's the case? You can't control that. So identifying that the way your boss treats you is not something that you can change. And so with that information, what is the morally appropriate thing for you to do? And the other part of your question was like, how do we know how to behave, and what things are our responsibilities? Well, then we look at our role ethics, are a really big aspect of Stoicism. So what is our role? Well, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a provider, although my wife also provides. And so when I'm considering what to do about an unkind boss, I have to consider those roles and responsibilities, because my desire might be to tell my boss to go screw and walk out and just not have a job the next day and say, well, I need to protect my pride, or something like that, as opposed to saying, well, is that really the morally appropriate thing to do for me, all of my context considered? Is that what I should do? Or should I zoom out from this situation, take the view from above, is what Marcus Aurelius calls it? Should I zoom out from this situation, see it for what it really is, and then make the appropriate choices that I can make to navigate it morally while sticking to my roles and responsibilities? So maybe that looks like, all right, we're going to let this guy be kind of a meanie. We'll just let that happen. And I'm going to start looking for a new job, and I'll try to keep this job for as long as I can. And then I will cycle out when it's appropriate, because I don't want to abandon my role as a provider to my family, or, as importantly, a contributing member of the cosmopolis. The Stoics were cosmopolitans. So being active in the community as an employer or as an employee, as a citizen, is incredibly important. And one of the things, in fact, it might be the only thing, that sets Stoicism apart from Cynicism, because both of those philosophies believe that virtue is the only good in the world. We could talk a little bit about that. But the cynics are basically like, yeah, but we could live naked in the street with no clothes and drink out of puddles, and we can still get virtue, which is technically true, but at least from their perspective. But the Stoics say, no, 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 no. In order to acquire virtue, you have to participate. So that's a really important aspect of Stoicism that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, ego is something that I think we all struggle with as humans because it's got its pros and its cons. And, we should have an ego. It's what makes us feel like we are important and contributing to society and have something to give back. But I also wonder sometimes if it causes us to think that everything's about us too much. We're too focused about us. And then that carries an extra weight, especially if your example of a boss, being upset or being mean to you, the minute you jump to it's all about me, that might carry extra suffering along with that versus wondering, is he just having a bad day? Everyone is inside their heads and thinking about themselves a lot more than they tend to be thinking about other people around them, right? And so how can Stoicism help with that understanding of, it's not all about me all the time? And, I wonder if we could even get into discussions around healthy boundaries, because I do feel like, there should be boundaries that aren't crossed. And ultimately, it's our responsibility, if there is a responsibility, to communicate what those boundaries look like to others around us in the community when we feel like those boundaries are being crossed, which might be that situation with the boss even, right? Maybe that's another kind of deep question with a lot of different answers, but can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's at least a couple angles there. The first is, and this is a part of Stoicism that some people are a little uncomfortable with, because in the same way that your contemporary Abrahamic religions can feel judgy at times about people who just haven't found Christ, for example, it'd be like, oh, they just aren't there yet, right? It can seem a little condescending. Stoicism has a little smidge of this in what I'm about to say, in that one of the things you need to recognize about your boss, first and foremost, is you don't have access to his or her hegemonic rational faculty. You don't know what's going on in their world. You don't know what their context is. You don't know if it's possible that the way they're treating you is, as they've reasoned it to be, the morally appropriate choice. Now, it's probably not, but you have to identify first that you don't know, and you can't know, because you don't have access to that information. You're not them, you're you. So that's one thing. The next thing is, most people, Epictetus says this, he talks about three kinds of people. You have the madman, and the madman is the person who is either ignorant of virtue or is aware of the idea of virtue but thinks pursuing it is a waste of time. And so this person is a madman. And the madman blames everyone else for his or her problems. Then there's the student. There's the prakopton is the word. And the prakopton will blame himself. But the sage blames no one, because they understand that the way you behave at any given time is the result of where you are at on your journey. And where you're at on your journey can't be sped up or slowed down. It is where you're at. So it's a little bit condescending, but when you look at somebody who you believe is behaving in this really what the Stoics would think of as a vicious way, that is to say, in a way that does not reflect a morally virtuous character, which is technically everybody, but some of us are working on it and some of us aren't. When you're looking at somebody like that, there should be a kind of sympathy, or even, and this is the part people don't like, pity, that they don't care about it. Because, and this will resonate with some people who are listening, and for others it won't, and I'm sorry for those who it misses. But those of us who have gone from feeling kind of lost in life and not having something to work toward, and then we find a thing, and in this case, that thing is Stoic philosophical practice, we really do feel like, man, it just sucks that they haven't found it yet. So keeping in mind that they can still progress, and someday they'll come across something that will get them to change their ways, or you hope that they do, and to genuinely hope that that happens for them, that will reduce a lot of the kind of, like you're saying, egoist anger or hurt that you might feel from it. Hey man, the way that they're treating you has more to do with them. In fact, probably has everything to do with them, 99% to do with them. It does with you. Now, if your boss is telling you that you suck because you're showing up to work an hour late every day, that has a little bit of something to do with you. But for the most part, we want to kind of pacify any kind of ego-ish feeling that it is about us. It's them. They're not there yet. They're not thinking rationally. They're not on the same journey. And some people can feel that's condescending. And then there was a third thing that you mentioned that I can't remember. And so that tangent went on for too long. And I can't remember what the third thing was.
I think you did a good job at addressing at least the first two, because I'm having trouble thinking of the third one as well. But to follow up to some of your points, first of all, showing up to work on time, I think for the most part is in your control, short of traffic or things that
Short of all
happen
kinds
on-
of things that make
yeah.
it not in your control. Yes, that's
But
true.
for the most part, I would hope, since most everyone shows up to work on time, we can deem that as something that can be improved, at least if there's issues
Can I
with
tell
it.
you a story real quick?
Yes, go
I
for
had a
it.
friend, his name is Eric, and I hope I will make him listen to this episode just because I want him to hear me talk about this. I bring him up all the time. He's also a philosopher, although he doesn't work in the space. He works in technology or something now. One time, I was really upset with him I was sympathizing with a shared employer that we had. And I'm like, dude, you're late like every day. And he gets called into his director's office, and presumably they're going to chew him out. And he comes out of the meeting, and I'm like, so what happened? He's like, oh, no, it's fine. I explained it. And I was befuddled by this, that he had explained this and he wasn't being fired. And he just kept being late all the time. And nothing ever happened to him. And a few weeks later, I pulled him aside and I was like, what? Like, what did you say that has you being able to be late? And he's like, well, my schedule changed and they moved it up a bit. And I said, how did you manage that? And he said, well, I asked them, if I was asleep, am I choosing to be late? I was asleep. What are you going to do? My body is asleep. How can I be awake if I'm asleep? And I'm like, that is such a philosopher's argument that probably drives employers nuts. So yeah, it's in your control, but also, hey man, if you're asleep, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And then we can get into a bunch of HR concerns around how involved can you get in someone's personal
That's right.
life
Yeah.
now. So but the thing that, you pointed out that might sound negative to some people is that, when you found the Stoic philosophy and you're following that and you're feeling like, man, they just haven't found it yet, and you're kind of taking that approach of what some might call pity, I almost look at it as more understanding and almost empathetic to the fact that you were once in their shoes, suffering the way they suffered, getting too wrapped up in emotions. And it's more of a recognizing that and having empathy for that and not letting it affect you negatively, is a way I kind of look at it. We've talked a lot about kind of intro to Stoicism. I'd love to kind of take this back to technology. So it's called the Tech Stoic podcast. I love technology. I love Stoicism. I put them together and I'm creating a podcast. So, for those of you watching, future episodes are going to be kind of technology focused. We might have one on AI and how can an approach to AI, using AI, with Stoic practices or a philosophy, be helpful. And so some of the things that, as I looked at my technology business, we redid our mission, vision, values. And we have 3 core values that I'll go ahead and mention without going into in too much depth, but Stoicism is one of them. You just heard a lot of information about Stoicism, continuous improvement, and process-based excellence. And so I feel like they kind of intertwine with each other. As you're talking about one, it can easily lead into the other. And, Stoicism, I would say when you read our core value, there's lots of things about Stoicism. The one that it kind of focuses on is what can we control? We mentioned, hey, there's not a lot you can control other than your thoughts. We understand that. But in the world of IT and technology, I don't know that clients would accept that. We can only control our thoughts. Sorry, too bad you got a security breach. So we have to take it a little further. Well, we define processes, right? We take, ultimately there's a people, a process, and a technology approach. We call it the PPTs. And so when you're too focused on technology, you're forgetting about the people and the process. If you're too focused on the process, maybe you're forgetting about the people. there's kind of a balance there. And the idea is, how can we develop processes that we try to adhere to as people that we can continually improve over time while trying to only focus on the things we can control. Maybe another way to explain that is like the 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of the things out there are going to be one-offs. It's like, don't waste time trying to develop processes and plan ahead for that 20%. Don't strive for perfection all the time because it is the enemy of good, right? And so my team originally, I had to educate them a little more on Stoicism and what that meant. And ultimately it came down to, don't worry about everything you've heard. And we're going into a lot more in this episode, but let's just try to look at the control aspect of it, right? And to the point where we're carrying these values internally and even using them in our everyday roles at this company, all the way down to communicating with the client about it. And so I'll give a quick example of something that's outside of our control that we run into a lot in technology, and it's the internet has gone down, right? And our client can't really blame us for that because we don't provide the internet connection, but they're still upset. They're still feeling the emotions of not being able to get work done. They're still relying on us to ultimately make sure it gets solved because we have a relationship, hopefully, with the internet service provider or understand the technology enough to know, when it's an internal issue versus the provider's issue. So we're kind of the guiding force in that. And when we step back and after we feel all that pain, what can we really control? Well, the discussion with the client then becomes more around business continuity. Well, what we can control is, what if we put in a backup internet connection so that if this happens again, we don't have to feel the same pain and the same emotions that we felt before. We're creating a new process. We're continuously improving the situation. So wanted to, talk about maybe some characteristics of Stoicism that work well in the tech world. And one of them that comes to mind is like calm rationality. And maybe we've talked about that a little bit already, but I was wondering if maybe we can go deeper into that and if you can give me some of your thoughts
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah. However, I would be remiss in my job as a philosopher to not point this out. This is one of the difficult things about co-opting any philosophy, but we're talking about Stoicism, co-opting Stoicism into, in this example, a business. Because I've just spent some time saying that Stoicism is about the development of moral character. But in the usage within a company context, it's instead we're using Stoicism as if the ultimate point of it were to treat our customers well or have them be happy with our service. So already we're redefining what the purpose of the usage of the philosophy is.
Well,
Now,
and I would add one more thing to develop good team culture, right? It's not just about the clients, it's all about how we work together as a team internally.
yep. So we've changed what the point of the philosophy is. So now what we're really doing is we're taking Stoicism and we're seeing how we can apply aspects of it in good faith and good practice to fill our roles really well. So what we're really doing is we're taking a Stoic approach to role fulfillment and responsibility fulfillment. So in this case, one of the things that Stoics like to ask themselves, some Stoics, I like to ask myself, I should say, I won't speak for all of us. I can't do that. I'm not the king of the Stoics. Is, what does this thing I'm doing right now, or this thing I'm about to do, reveal about my character? Would the sage do this? So this is very much like, what would Jesus do? Right? This is along the same veins. But when we turn it internally, we say, what does the decision to consider the reality of the client and come up with a solution by putting in a backup internet, putting in a secondary circuit, like what you were talking about? What does that say about my character as an IT professional? Does that reveal something about my character that's positive? Yeah, I'm somebody who takes my role seriously. I'm somebody who wants to provide useful solutions to the people who pay me to support and provide for them. So in that way, yes, that's a very stoically inspired, let's say, approach to team building and culture within a business. This is all about developing your support character. What do your actions communicate to your customers about who you are on the inside and how much you care? And I think that's a great way to approach. I mean, yes, here because we're talking about IT, but I wish everybody did that. Everybody in every position in every kind of business. What a world that would be.
Yeah, thank you for pointing all of that out because I did kind of just jump into trying to act like it's not, it's more of a stoic approach to running a business, building a team, and servicing clients.
I should point out that this is actually quite admirable, I think. You consider yourself in your personal life to be a Stoic. You also run a business, and you're trying to apply Stoic concepts to this role and responsibility that you have. And I think that that reveals about your character that, first of all, you see Stoicism providing benefit beyond just your own pursuit of virtue. Or even now that we've had this conversation to some extent, you'll probably begin to think that doing this in your professional capacity in that role actually is reflective of your moral capacity. And so it all ties together. And hopefully maybe other people who work on your team feel the same way. But even if they don't, I think we don't have to sell them stoicism so much as we have to sell them what kind of tech character do you want to be? And do you want people to view you as somebody who cares or as some jerk who is just there for the paycheck and couldn't care less about their particular situation? Now, that's easy in IT to feel that way sometimes about your clients because sometimes clients are like, man, I've got an emergency. Everything's on fire. And we're like, oh my God, what's happening? And they're like, oh, my CEO can't get his email right now. And you're like, you submitted this ticket as a work stop issue. Well, it's because it's the CEO. So sometimes we want to pull our hair out. It's a little hard to be forgiving, but we still have to. What does it say about a person's character when they be forgiving anyway in circumstances where it's extra difficult?
Well, that's a great segue into calm rationality, right? I mean, we have to have a lot of that. You mentioned a fire, feeling like there's a fire. I also think in technology, I relate a lot of the things we deal with almost like firefighting. Someone says there's a fire. How big is the fire? We have to assess that. We have to try to put it out. Can we also look at preventing fires from happening in the first place? So, and I feel like we've kind of talked about calm rationality already, just in the idea of understanding that someone else's emotion they might be feeling, whether it's, really positive or negative for that matter, should be something that we don't let affect us and cause us to take away from our moral character we're trying to build. Right.
So what we're talking about now, I love that this came up because it's great. It's important to recognize this difference as well, this distinction. It's important to make this distinction. There is Stoicism, capital S, as in the Greek philosophy of virtue ethics. That's Stoicism with a capital S. Then there's Stoicism with a lowercase s, which has come to mean this kind of, I don't want to call it detached, but it's a compartmentalization of emotion from duty. And that's an important skill in, let's say you're a combat medic, which is an example that a colleague of mine, Leonidas Konstantikos, gives in, he's written a paper on just war theory, because some people think, well, if you're a Stoic, you can't ever think war is appropriate, but that's not the case. So he's interesting to read. But it can sometimes be stoically, capital S, appropriate to be Stoic, lowercase s, because we do want to say, all right, this is a little bit of a disaster. It's a little tension. If I can't fix this, I might lose my job, right? Sometimes us techs think, oh God, if I don't fix this, my boss is going to really have my ass. And so we can work ourselves up a bit, but it is a beneficial skill to be able to repress that and get your job done. That can also be a little toxic, so you have to be very measured in it, because no Stoic, capital S, would ever say, please repress your emotions and pretend that they don't exist, because that doesn't say anything good about our moral character. But also, there's this great story. I can't remember. It might be the case that we don't know who it is. I think there's a suspicion that it was Epictetus or a student of Epictetus, but he's on a ship and he's coming from Greece, and I think he's traveling to Rome, and he's a renowned Stoic, but we've lost his name. But this story survives. So it may not be a true story. Maybe it's just one of those things that makes it through history, like a folktale or something. But he's a renowned Stoic, and the ship is in this terrible storm. And the captain of the ship is noticing, he knows who this guy is. He's like, oh, this is the great Stoic philosopher. What's his name? And he's noticing that throughout the journey, as there's a storm and it's rough, that this guy looks pale as a sheet. He looks scared. right? So the storm passes and they land and they disembark, and he approaches him. He says, "Look, I know who you are. I've got to ask you a question. I don't want to be rude." And I think the story actually goes that the guy thought it was kind of rude, but that's a different aspect of the story. He asks, why, you're a Stoic. Why did you look so concerned? And that's part of Stoicism, where we talk about these kind of like animalistic base responses to things that are going on. And they are very human. And we're not trying to get rid of them. So the example that he gives, well, if a lightning bolt hits right next to me, I'm going to be scared. And I'm not choosing to be that. This is like a subconscious animal lizard brain reaction kind of thing, right? It's kind of like when a friend of yours decides to play a prank and they pop out from around a corner and they scare you, right? And you're scared. And then your rational faculty kicks in and you begin to realize this is a friend. This is a practical joke. I'm not supposed to be scared. I may now be mad, but I'm not supposed to be scared. There's no reason to be scared. And so one of the things in Stoicism that you're efforting to become very good at is to, as quickly as you possibly can, get your rational faculty to gain power over the animal response. But that animal response will never go away. So when we're within the IT world, when we're in something that's making us feel very anxious, it may be fully natural for us to be feeling that way. So what we're trying to do in that instance is not pretend like that is not a natural response or shame ourselves for feeling anxious about something that's happening to a client and maybe we're going to lose them and it's going to cost a lot of money and maybe I lose my job. We're jumping to a lot of conclusions, but to jump to those conclusions in the first place is a very human thing to do. But at some point, and the longer we practice Stoicism, the better we get at this, we can say, whoa, 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 whoa. We are assenting to a lot of impressions that either are factually not true or that we're assuming are true and we can't know. They may be true, but we don't know. So in the case of an emergency situation in the IT world, we want to quickly realize that this is a technical problem, no matter what it is, because we're in IT. It's a technical problem. It has a solution. It is solvable. And the best thing for me to do right now is let's process this fact that I'm a bit stressed out, and then let's let our rational faculty kick in and say, this is solvable. But we're not going to solve it if we're upset. So let's try to quarantine this a bit, realize it for what it is, a challenge. And what does it say about someone's character who rises to a challenge appropriately as befits their role? It says that they're serious about character development, or tech character development in this case.
Yeah, it's resilience, right?
Yep.
At
As I
its
said,
core.
a side effect of Stoicism is resilience.
Yeah. And I'm glad you called out shame because I've been there before. I wonder in the past, you tend to make up these stories in your head. And for someone like me, I'm type A personality. I feel like I strive for perfection too much, which causes me to be ultra hard on myself. It's rare that I wake up on a given morning and feel like I'm enough. I've done enough, right? And I use this saying at the end of the day, no matter how my day went, good enough today, better tomorrow, right? This idea of I made it through the day. I'm not going to beat myself up no matter how the day went. I always have an option to do better tomorrow, like continuous improvement, right? And yeah, I've shamed myself when I've lost a client, for example, right? A client decides to leave and you're sitting there going, what did I do wrong? And you start making up all these stories in your head of what you could have done, what you did wrong and what you could have done better. And at the end of the day, it's collecting information, as much information as you can about the situation and trying to understand, okay, here's where some things went wrong. Here's where we could do better next time to maybe prevent this.
This is actually one of the great things about Stoicism from a practical perspective is when you practice it in earnest in your personal life, something you come to realize is the power of it. I would say maybe the greatest byproduct of it is a kind of confidence in the choices you've made, so that when you arrive at situations like the one you're describing, where you're beating yourself up, you arrive at those scenarios or in those situations less and less, because when you are carefully turning over in your mind what is the character appropriate thing to do, the morally appropriate thing to do, and you make what you reason to be with the data available to you at the time, every morally just choice that you can make along the 10 steps to get to that client firing you anyway, you can look at the client firing you and you can say, well, I made every rationally correct decision. And so there was nothing I could do. This is not about what I did. This is not my fault. This is what has happened. There was no other way to navigate it. I navigated it perfectly well. And then that makes you feel like, well, maybe there's something else about this client leaving me. And then you start to think about Epictetus and the dichotomy of control and the things that we can choose and the things that we can't. So it's very reinforcing to, it can help you to feel down about yourself, at least for a less long period of time, if not less infrequently, the better you get at it.
Yeah, it's, what I've read about Stoicism and emotions, they talk about, we've mentioned this obviously, is it's not that you're compartmentalizing them so much that you lack empathy for others or even yourself, but it's almost like you don't get too attached to them, whether they are positive or negative. And with the idea that, you do try to minimize the amount of negative emotions by not making up stories in your head that may not be true. But I wonder if it works the other way too, where you're not making up stories in your head trying to be attached to positive emotions, where now your ego, as they might say, gets out of control even, or you're chasing positive emotions all the time and it's all about the dopamine rush that you get used to get through your day. And there's almost kind of like a mindful balance, right? Where let's talk about like that appreciation, right? We want to appreciate the emotions there. We don't want to shove it down and bottle it up because it will come back later in some other form. But yet we also, from what I understand, don't want to like hang on to it where the minute it leaves us, now we're just like, don't know what to do with ourselves.
So in Stoicism, there's this idea that the only true evil, the only thing which is evil, and the Stoics are very, if something is a thing, it has to be that thing all the time. I mentioned earlier on that there's only one good moral knowledge because it's the only thing that's good all the time. Everything else is informed by context. Well, the other side of that is evil. There's only one true evil. It is ignorance, moral ignorance, because it's the only thing that can be bad all the time. So when we think about all the worst people in history who've done terrible things, we have to, as Stoics, see it as a problem of moral knowledge, as an ignorance problem. Hitler did the things he did because he made so many terribly unjust, irrational decisions and began to see the world in a way that was so far divorced from the way that it actually was, that he actually thought he was right. And if he had just made the right decisions, he would have been a completely different dude. And when we look at people like that, it can be really helpful. When we look at ourselves like that, it can be really helpful in kind of neutralizing the passion that we can feel about a person's actions or an event's outcomes or what we perceive to be the outcomes of a person's actions or our own. It's important in Stoicism for this reason that I've just outlined to be as careful as you can about assenting to impressions of reality, because the more you do it wrong, the more vulnerable you are to doing it more often. And the more often you do it, the worse off you get. We don't want to be too excited. We don't want to think that selling that one client or getting that one job, whatever, makes us really great. We're so great. We're beyond reprieve. We're untouchable. These are positive feelings, I suppose, but they're going to send us into a direction that we're going to be living in fantasy land. And the same is true in the other direction. It will look different, but the problem is the same. We have assented to impressions about reality that aren't true, and they've taken us so far off the path that our life isn't about what's real anymore. It's about this fantasy that we've created for ourselves. And emotions are the things that threaten to do that to us if we're not careful with how we process them. So they're not the enemy, but they're a potentially volatile substance that we have to be very careful with. So the reason that Stoics are sometimes blamed for being too slow to act on something, especially like in the moral landscape in society, is because we're trying to make sure we're making the right choice. Because to make the wrong choice kicks off a sequence of events that could make things even worse. And we don't want that to happen.
I've been there on both sides, and when it comes to technology, there's, and even the 24-hour news cycle, right? Even if we're not talking about technology, it feels like everything's driven by two extremes. It's either fear, uncertainty, and doubt or fear of missing out, right? And in the IT world, it's like, what do we have fear, uncertainty, and doubt around that's driving our decisions that maybe we shouldn't be so attached to? What do we have fear of missing out that we might be too attached to, and how do we kind of balance that? In the past, I mentioned earlier, we use a people process technology approach, right? And in the past, in growing my business, there was a point in time where I thought it was all about the tools or the technology, and you had to have the right technology, and that was the answer. And I did kind of fork down this path of thinking, as long as I had the right tools, I had all the answers, without even realizing that the people and process is actually more important than the technology side of things. And then, it's not easy when you go down that wrong fork, and you hopefully at some point come to the realization that it's not the answer. You don't have all the answers. The minute you think you have all the answers, that's when you start setting yourself up for failure. You come down crashing hard. And I've crashed hard. And then you're on the other side going, man, I've been doing this wrong this whole time, thinking that was the answer. I got so attached to feeling that way, and I realized now it's not. And then all of a sudden I feel like there's not enough of time to make up for it. There's not an abundance of time like there actually is to just, I think you made a point about this earlier about, I forget exactly what the comment was, but it was around the sage. You talked about how sages react to things, right? As far as not being worried about not getting something done quick enough, or taking too long, or things not happening when you feel like they should happen and they aren't. Ultimately, like not getting attached to outcomes, I guess, that you're expecting. Maybe. You just froze on me. We'll let you come back. Or did it kick him out? All right, we've got Tanner back. We actually had an internet outage that we're taking a stoic approach to dealing with here and picking things right back up. I was talking about my own experience of kind of getting trapped into the FUD and the FOMO and feeling like tools were the answer and they were going to solve all my problems. Automation per se. Now there's AI. And if I was my old self, I would probably say that I would be overly excited about AI and feeling like that's going to solve all my problems as well. And how when I realized I was hanging on to something that wasn't reality, right? Ultimately, it came crashing down. And then now questioning everything and feeling like I wasted a bunch of time going down this bad fork, as we were calling it earlier, and almost, shame, depression. There's not enough time in the day to catch up with all the time I wasted thinking I had the right answers and I didn't. And so it's, that's really when I found Stoicism and was really trying to help balance things. I actually studied Buddhism for a while, and that was mainly around meditation and mindfulness. And as I learned more about Stoicism, and I'm still learning, I'm always going to call myself a student of Stoicism because to your point earlier, I feel like it's something that I'm practicing every day. What I'd like to do is kind of, we can wrap up the podcast episode, but maybe end it on this idea of, is there ever a destination when it comes to anything in life, even Stoicism, or is every day a practice, a continuous improvement? And do you have anything to share around that?
Yeah, I'll say two things, or I'll say one thing before I say the thing about that, because I'm loquacious, as you know, at this point. The worst thing about going down those many forked paths is, if you take a forked path in the woods, when you get to the point where you're like, maybe I should have taken that other one, you turn back and it's impossible to navigate your way back, right? So now what you're doing is you're looking laterally, and you got to cut through all these woods to get back to the right path. So it's a very uncomfortable process. And I think we've all been there before, the forked path in the woods metaphor. And this fear of being in that situation should not give you like decision constipation, right? It shouldn't make you afraid to make a choice. But it is something that you need to keep in mind, that I don't want to be in that scenario because my character will suffer and other people will suffer as a result of my character suffering. So it's a serious thing to keep in mind, but it shouldn't prevent us from being willing to make a choice, because of course, what does being afraid to make a choice say about our character? It's a great thing to constantly revisit. And now as far as destination, right? The answer is, so the Stoics said that that the sage was as rare as the phoenix. Now the Stoics didn't believe in a supernatural God. They called God the seemingly rational logic that exists in the universe, because the universe is stable, so there must be some kind of logic built into it. And so they viewed that thing and things that represented that as being God or being godlike. But they didn't believe in like a supernatural person who passed down moral rules to you in a book or something. So when they said that the sage was as rare as the phoenix, it's a little tongue in cheek because they didn't believe in phoenixes. Now, I'm one of the only Stoic philosophers who say this. I might be the only one. But I think that they understood that the sage was achievable theoretically, in that I suppose it's possible to acquire perfect moral knowledge. It exists, and so maybe we can achieve it theoretically, hypothetically. But in practice, it's never achievable, which is actually a really powerful thing because it enables us to always see that there's more we could be doing to improve ourselves. Now that in itself can be toxic because, well, does this just mean I'm never good enough? No, it doesn't. Well, I mean, technically, strictly Stoic sense, I suppose it means you're not a sage, so you're not good enough, but that's not the judgment, right? Really what it means is at no point should we assume that we are impervious to error or poor moral judgment. And having that in mind all the time is itself very powerful towards our progress. If we can keep that in mind all the time, we can become very humble, very flexible, neuroplastic, I think modern people would call it. We can be very moldable people, and we can prevent ourselves from becoming like granite and being unwilling or unable to change. So destination, not really. You never get there. And that's okay. I think that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of what I mentioned earlier that I try to use as a tool as much as possible is good enough today, right? Are we ever good enough? Well, I'm good enough today. I have the opportunity to do better tomorrow, right? And then I think, when I was growing up, and maybe this still stands today, but there's that idea that older people tend to be stuck in their ways more. I wonder if that's almost a comfort to develop beliefs around moral character that you can rely on and never have to worry about questioning your own moral character that causes someone to be stuck in their ways and not as neuroplastic, right?
Yeah. Well, stoically speaking, an old person might seem to a younger Prakopton that they're stuck in their ways. But what it might mean instead, the reality might be that older Prakopton is more confident that the choices they've made and the choices they're making are the ones that they ought to be making after their years of experience. And it doesn't bother them that someone with less experience. Seneca also said something like, we're both patients in the same hospital. I've just been here 20 years longer than you, but we're both still sick. But there's a certain kind of comfortability or consistency that comes with gaining the practice and habituation of following Stoic philosophy. At some point, you do get to a point where you're like, I've already worked my way through those criticisms, and it's good that you're having them of yourself, but I'm pretty confident in where I'm at. Now, we have to be careful that that's not an egoist position. And it's a balance. It's very difficult. Nobody is saying that Stoicism is like easy. I don't think any religion or philosophy would describe itself as easy to practice. They all require a lot of effort, and I think everybody would agree nobody ever gets them right unless they're, I guess in Christianity, Jesus, and Islam, Allah, and all these other figures who we won't talk about whether or not those are real or not, but they're concepts in any case.
Yeah, and I can even appreciate religion for that fact, right? It's guiding principles that people have that hopefully are helping them develop good moral character. Maybe there's some religions that don't always do that, but in my mind, it's a framework for that. Let's jump into kind of some takeaways. So you've been mentioning journaling, and say that again. What your journal is called?
Oh, I have the Prakopton journaling program. It's a year-long journaling program that delivers a journaling prompt every week. Provides a mini essay that kind of sets up the journaling prompt and puts you in the mindset to respond to it. And it only runs a year. It's not a recurring subscription or anything. It costs $96, and you can learn more about it at stoicjournaling.com and enroll if you'd like. a lot of people really have enjoyed it. And the reason that it's a year long and that it's not a monthly fee, nobody likes being nickeled and dimed monthly, right? It's like a Netflix subscription. It's one of those things that you want to spend a year doing. And a lot of people have shared some really good stories about it. I also have at the moment, I'm trying to build a community for men in midlife, specifically entrepreneurs and men in tech who have kids and are trying to find other people who are trying to navigate that midlife along the Stoic path, which can be, I don't know how many Stoics you actually get to meet in your own life, Brian, but I don't know many who live in my neighborhood, right? So it can be kind of hard to find that camaraderie. But that's not ready yet. But if anybody's interested in learning more about it, they can go to stoicismpod.com/midlife, and they can just sign up for notifications as the program develops. And then, of course, I have a podcast, Practical Stoicism, which you can find at stoicismpod.com.
Cool. And I did sign up for the, say it again, I still don't have it.
It's a Procopton journaling program.
Procopton journaling program. I do want to try that out. I'm going to get started on that. I love that. And I love that you're building kind of a community approach so we can help connect with others and share ideas and learn from each other, really. Thank you for coming on. I realized that if I'm starting a podcast called The Tech Stoic, and I'm in no way a Stoic expert, I'm learning about it every day and seeing how it helps me with my own personal life as well as my business and my team, technology-wise, that I should have on the first episode someone who is more well-practiced than I am, lives and breathes Stoicism a lot more, or has lived and breathed it a lot more than I have.
Thank you. The sick patient in the same hospital. Yeah.
There you go. I like that approach too. So thank you, everyone, for watching the podcast, and stay tuned for the next episode. I'm doing these monthly, The Tech Stoic, where technology meets ancient wisdom. Thank you.
Miles on the future calls, ancient echoes in the halls. Circuits buzz, but hearts stay still. The Stoic mind bends to its will. Control the chaos, seize the flame. Resilient minds play no game. Strength and wisdom to console. The Tech Stoic makes us whole. Screams may flicker, thoughts are steel. Resilience forged in what we feel. Algorithms guide but can't define the timeless truth of the human mind. Control the chaos, seize the flame. Resilient minds play no game. Strength and wisdom to console. The Tech Stoic makes us whole. Screens may flicker, thoughts are steel. Resilience forged in what we feel. Algorithms guide but can't define the timeless truths of the human mind. Control the chaos, seize the flame. Resilient minds play no game. Strength and wisdom to console. The Tech Stoic makes us whole. In the glow of silicon skies, ancient wisdom never dies. From the code to the stars above, Stoic strength meets modern love. Control the chaos, seize the flame. Resilient minds play no